This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is November 13th, 2025.
I'm Stuart Lennebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, the BC NDP are heading into their convention this weekend, so we'll preview that. And Mark Carney has unveiled the next wave of projects, which we thank him so very deeply for, not just because a bunch of them are here in BC, but because if he didn't do that, it would kind of be a nothing week.
Yeah, it's been a slow news week. Not unexpected with Remembrance Day sitting in the first half of the week, but...
And both the legislature and House of Commons on break because of that.
Yeah, exactly. But it does mean the content's a little thinner this week than it normally is.
We're debating before the show, do we throw in this random speculative poll from Research Co? We decided against, but you can go check it out, or there's lots happening. We have these discussions in the Patreon Slack, so join that, patreon.com/politicos, and join the conversation of all the little stories that happen in between.
The poll in this case being how does a bunch of random potential replacements for John Rustad do stacked up against EB?
The answer is kind of the same to much worse, with most people just going, I don't know who any of these people are, except for Christy Clark and maybe Diane Watts.
Yeah, strong showing for the undecideds.
Also, Centre BC is viewed as centrist by the plurality of British Columbians, so that worked for them. Let's tease up this weekend's excitement. The NDP convention is happening in Victoria. Delegates from across the province have been nominated by the Electoral District Association. They'll be gathering, drinking, partying, listening to speeches, arguing over policy recommendations, and voting on whether to send David Eby to a leadership review. That is, if you vote yes, he is being rejected as leader. If you vote no, you support his leadership.
Glad there's no confusion on that one.
They are reminding this of people. Rob Shaw puts that in his piece, but it's kind of a common thing to make sure people vote the right way. Conventions aren't normally newsworthy. Like they get a couple stories after the governing party.
Talked about any of John Horgan's really. Is that maybe to briefly note that, yeah, there was no effort to kick him out.
Yeah, John Horgan's approval, I think, was not Saddam Hussein level after the first election, because people were the party members were just happy to be in government. They're like, you could do no wrong, John. You were in government. You get 98% or whatever. By his third review near the end, I think it was down to mid-low 80%. And maybe if he'd stuck around longer and lived longer, he could have ridden out like most BC premiers do, which is to either be defeated or resign in scandal or shame or unpopularity. But no, he went out on still a pretty good high. It doesn't seem like David Eby is in that same situation.
Yeah, the enthusiasm just isn't quite the same when you hold on to government for a third term, but don't post, an amazing election result and don't really have a lot of big things you're driving at. And
it's ironic because we're going to talk about the major projects that are coming to BC that I think Eby is going to start to frame his premiership around. But in terms of where the BC NDP were a few years ago, talking about expanding childcare and building schools and, expanding the healthcare system, all of that is kind of on the back seat to keeping things going.
Yeah, well, also a lot of that's just kind of grinding away in the background.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're it either just opened or is in the process of opening. There's a new hospital around Duncan that's in Cowichan area that's going to be coming online, and that's something that got started a while ago. But there isn't that kind of follow through to the Nets thing. That's what I think is missing, is really kind of a now what? And I mean, major projects are good. It captures the spirit of the moment, but you gotta start doing a little more on that. Like, I don't know, like announce a new SkyTrain line or something. Just do something that leans into it rather than where it seems like now where he's almost a passive observer or, hanging on to Carney's coattails on this.
Yeah, and we'll get into the projects themselves, but most of them are mines or LNG, which the LNG especially has become it's BC Liberal coded, even though they haven't been around for a while. When I hear LNG, I still think of Christy Clark. And
hey, it worked for her politically.
Yeah, exactly. Like they own that issue, and maybe it's because the NDP has lost ground in the north, and maybe these projects are how they help rebuild that, but it doesn't connect in the same way. And maybe, a SkyTrain line or something like that. Although they're the ones who are moving forward the Arbutus line and the Langley lines of the SkyTrain. And we just kind of forget that those are being slowly, quietly built. I guess they're not too quiet, so quiet or slow. If you're
my old apartment was actually literally on top of where the SkyTrain is going to be making the climb and the curve up from down near like Fall Street Flats up into Mount Pleasant and Broadway. And trust me, it was loud when the tunnel boring machines were going underneath the building.
Fair.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, don't recommend living above an active tunnel lane operation if you can avoid it. But yeah, on those ones, that got started a long time ago. I think they were, that was early John Horgan and was, more or less going to be in process, kind of regardless of who won the 2017 election. Like that was pretty much a sure thing at that point. I think they spent like 2016 doing a bunch of the drilling, geotechnical investigation drilling along Broadway and whatnot. It's like that's almost 10 years in the making at this point. What's the next thing?
Show us something shiny. From that question, you can maybe be tempted to look into the policy booklet of the things they're going to debate as members. And like all parties these days, you get this shiny, giant document full of random ideas that, we can take any of them and find good ideas, and let's call them interesting ideas for lack of a better word, and not wanting to demean them. Like ICBC opening a pet insurance thing is in there.
Yeah.
I don't know where that's coming from, but it's
the membership policies,
unique.
Kind of do run the gamut from the good, the bad to the just weird.
And each party has their method of honing, for better or worse, to prioritize certain policies.
Yeah, so the thing about these is like they are never dispositive about what the party's actually going to do, because those decisions get made in the leader's office or among the campaign team or whatnot during, government or in elections. And I doubt any campaign operative has ever gone to the convention resolution book to flip through to look for ideas on that. But usually these are staged, managed to various degrees of effectiveness, largely to avoid the bad press or getting distracted with things the government doesn't want to talk about.
And there's ample critique of that from party membership of every party, especially when their party is in government. It's the frustration that a party, especially a party with the word democratic in its name, doesn't listen to its members.
Yeah, I don't think the federal liberals are quite as broken up about that, largely because if they really cared about a specific policy program versus being in government, they probably wouldn't have been liberals in the first place.
And the conservative base definitely has its factions that want to see the items in its policy book make it to platforms and government policy if and when they form government, and get frustrated when it doesn't. So I don't know. We'll put a link to Rob Shaw's summary of the policy buffet that is in there, but usually only 3 to 6 policies actually make it to the floor for debate and vote. Like you mentioned, those are stage managed. Some might be more controversial than others. I know there's always groups eager to see things pass or fail, and I don't know. We'll get the stories next week of what was contentious and what wasn't.
Yeah,
I think the thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, a few of these ones are potentially contentious just because they go against where the government is right now. A couple on the BC Ferries contract with China.
I think those actually will make it to. I think something on that will make it to the floor.
Yeah, so
I don't know how it'll go either.
That's embarrassing to the government to have the party base indicate displeasure on it. Some of the stuff is, we don't really think you've done a good enough job on the $10 a day childcare. And then there's just like the weird bad idea ones, like taking a page out of Richard Nixon's book and doing price controls on gasoline.
There's at least one province that currently has price controls on gas at the pumps. I think it's Nova Scotia. I have honestly I drive an electric car, so I don't care anymore. But I don't think that one will make it to the floor. The unions, I think, are really eager to see the debate over the ferries contracts hit the floor so that they can at least express their displeasure. And in some ways, it can just be a vent, right? The party lets them vote that we shouldn't have let China build our ferries, and then everyone gets to pat themselves on the back and go on with what they were going to do anyway. I think aside from the policy and the leadership vote itself, the other thing that gets often overlooked is who wins the table officers and who becomes the party executive. That can sometimes be a bit more contentious. There is a preferred slate from the central, David Eby and his office, his friends. They want to see former candidate and MLA Aman Singh take over the presidency. I don't actually know who the other candidates running are, but we'll see. I'd be surprised if Singh didn't win, given his prominence. But, sometimes that can be a way to re-steer the party if you're in the aggressive grassroots and unhappy with how things have been going. Oh. So I'll keep an eye on it over the weekend. I won't be there, but I know people who will be there.
And yeah, who knows? Maybe if the leadership thing goes real south for David Eby, we will have a lot of content in the next few weeks.
In the meantime, turning to the federal government, this afternoon, Mark Carney announced the next 7 projects he wants to have his major projects office fast track. More like 6 projects with an asterisk.
6 projects in a concept, really.
Yeah. So the projects not in BC to start, ones we probably won't talk much about. Sisson Mine for critical minerals in New Brunswick, specifically for tungsten and molybdenum. The Crawford Nickel Project in Ontario. A hydro project in Iqaluit. That'll be, I believe, an Indigenous-owned hydro that will do a lot to get Nunavut off of diesel power in a lot of smaller communities. And the Nouveau Monde Graphite Phase 2 project in Quebec.
Will the hydro project actually get a lot of communities off there? I mean, it's big boom for Iqaluit. 30,000-ish people. In an area larger, well, in what is quite literally the largest subnational jurisdiction on the planet. It just doesn't get very practical to run lines from there very far outside of Iqaluit. Maybe get all of Baffin Island, but
it's positive. So,
it's positive.
Generating power from hydro is much better than diesel.
For
both for just the environmental, but also just the cost, like shipping barrels of diesel fuel up there to power things just screams inefficiency. So I like that project, actually, out of all of them. I think it might be my favorite. But here in BC, we are getting the Kasai-Lisms, apologies if I'm screwing it up, I'm trying, liquefied natural gas project in northern British Columbia. We are getting the North Coast Transmission Line, which we've already talked about on this show, and something called the Northwest Critical Conservation Corridor, a phrase that didn't exist before today, as far as we can Google.
Yeah, not much was coming up when we Googled that one. Basically, from what we can tell, it's a general concept to link kind of the Northwest coast and in the area somewhat inland from there up into the Yukon with power lines, communications, infrastructure like fiber and cell towers, as well as highways, ports. Basically just a bunch of infrastructure in there that is also going to be vaguely conservation related somehow.
Yeah,
largely based on the name. It's not, the details are not clear on this.
Yeah, there's not a lot of details. I didn't see any maps, but it does suggest, basically, like you said, going from the North Coast Transmission Line that will take power across the north to help power things like the Kasai-Lisms LNG project with hydro, and extend those power lines north to Yukon, build highways so that you can also drive there without going through Dawson, I guess, and build new ports and support communities. And while they're doing that, flag a bunch of the local forests for conservation and protection, and all of this in consultation with the complex and often overlapping Indigenous First Nations that are up there, and have, outstanding land claims that make some of these other projects controversial and difficult to move forward. And hence the support of the Major Projects Office is welcomed by David Eby in getting both Kasai-Lisms and the North Coast generally moving forward. So 3 projects that really all tie together. The Kasai-Lisms project is an interesting one. It started to be in the news, especially in the last couple of weeks, as environmentalists, I think, have taken it into their crosshairs. It's part owned by the Niska Nation, but also a Texas conglomerate and some other Canadian investment in there, specifically Western LNG, which is based in Texas, but also has offices in Vancouver. It'll be the second largest LNG project in Canada after LNG Canada, I believe it is. That's the first, which is just south of there. I think similar-ish area. Both will rely on the Prince Rupert gas transmission line to provide fracked gas from, the interior of BC to the coast. It's interesting putting all of these projects in the Major Projects Office on the federal government's agenda, given even outside of BC, the only one of these projects that crosses provincial lines is this theoretical conservation corridor, if it makes it to the Yukon.
There's basically 3 corridor projects that being in there. Just the first tranche of projects also featured the Arctic Security Corridor in there, which was
another idea of a thing.
Yeah, similarly phrased. Although that one I could at least picture a little cleaner on what they were going for on that. This one here is a little vaguer, and the Alto high speed rail wasn't like a top tier project, but was in the things we are also working on list that came out with the first batch.
It's interesting to put this critical conservation corridor in this announcement, but the Alto high speed rail eventually it'll be there.
Yeah, it's not ideal. I'm completely fine with just doing a bunch of like critical mineral projects, some energy projects, on all that if we're trying to do it, but it needs to be part of a broader whole. And it, so far on the first couple batches, doesn't really feel that way. I think some of it too is that a lot of these are ones that are, primarily private sector funded, other than like the North Coast transmission line, which the BC government is getting some help with the feds on. That's mostly what the announcement on that one was when it comes to funding. But like none of these so far are going to require, massive outlays of federal infrastructure dollars, other than potentially that the vague corridor projects.
Yeah. It's really leaning into the rip it and ship it mentality. We have resource extraction as kind of Canada's history, and it's always been there. There was a period where through the latter half of the 20th century there was a lean into domestic manufacturing, and we built our auto sector, and that was going great until very recently, for Ontario at least. And it's not easy to rebuild a manufacturing sector or to try to figure out a new economy, right? Because other countries are all ahead of us for the most part, which means you have to spend a lot to catch up. And so on the short-term financial budgeting process, it looks like a risky and possibly bad investment unless you can make it work over the long term. And one of the challenges I think we've covered with the Trudeau government was this hopping around from super cluster to innovation hubs to whatever, fad of the month kind of captured their industrial strategy without a commitment to long-term visioning for it. And maybe that's just a structural issue with our politics these days. But nothing's changed in here.
Yeah, and I wonder also how much of this is them feeling a little shy after being bitten on the Stellantis stuff, where they threw $13 billion into it, and the thing folded and left after just a couple years. They might be less inclined to do that kind of industrial strategy on it, which is, granted, pretty hard to effectively pull off. Just globally, for every successful bit of industrial strategy, there are dozens upon dozens of very expensive subsidy regimes that didn't end up resulting in what was hoped for out of it.
I think that's right. And, it's really easy to critique the Stellantis and the EV battery subsidies because they look ridiculous. We want this private company to build a factory here, and we will pay them, $5 million per job or $10 million per job per year, when you could just give people that money and it would probably work out better and they wouldn't leave. But now the money's left and we're fucked. So I'm not saying our job strategy should be just give people the money, but I'm saying it's not worse than what we've done. But, the overall announcements are good for BC. It happens to be that we have a lot of mines and a lot of potential for mines. I feel like the conservation corridor, the Arctic corridor, are things that can actually work to that dream of nation building projects, right? Like the idea of connecting Yukon and Northwest British Columbia and helping navigate the complexities of the Northwest Coast First Nations governance and land claims. And if that can all go through, the corridor could actually be the most exciting project in this batch, in that it has the possibility of transforming an entire region beyond just like the municipality where the different mines are specifically located.
Yeah. The other interesting thing is the two corridor projects that have really been discussed have both been north-south ones, which is Honestly, not what I expected. I kind of figured we'd be doing more like east-west infrastructure, just because that tends to be where the population is set up in the country.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's good. We're improving connections to the north. It's going to be, the Arctic's going to be an increasingly important geopolitical area in the 21st century, and actually being able to effectively interact with it by having the infrastructure to get up there is going to be very important. But um, yeah, it's a little surprising there isn't more emphasis on improving our east-west links, considering that there's a lot of distance to cover, and the east-west trade is not what it probably should be in the country.
Yeah, and it's also quite notable that Alberta, Manitoba, and most of Atlantic Canada don't have projects yet. Like beyond some of there's a couple theoretical ones. I think there was an offshore wind project for, I want to say, Nova Scotia, and a carbon capture and storage potential project in Alberta, but those are still on the further review ones, or sorry, the transformative strategy levels rather than the uh, immediate priorities. And I guess at least for this government, they can't be accused of the standard, Ontario Quebec liberal bias, because right now it's a BC bias, if anything, which is new.
Yeah. The other thing is very rural focused, which, made sense if you're doing natural resource projects on it. But at the
not just rural, but remote.
Yeah, very
right?
remote. There's very little here other than the container terminal in Montreal that has.
Oh, and the Darlington nuclear project.
That's reasonably far outside of.
Okay.
Toronto. It's past Oshawa.
Okay.
Out far outskirts.
People live within an hour of there.
Yeah,
which I can't say about many of the other projects.
That is true. It is. It's along Lake Ontario. As you head out of Toronto on your way to Kingston.
I'm just looking at the national map, and most of them are like in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is, we're a country that's 80-ish% urbanized. The issues around getting around Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and being able just to move people and goods through there is also something that has national impact. Toronto has like a higher GDP than several provinces combined, and it is also notoriously difficult to get around that city. The 401 and the highways are crowded and congested, and the subway system is not much better.
You heard it here first. The Major Projects Office should invest in a tunnel highway.
Well, I mean, that's what Doug Ford has been trying to get. He put that on his list of the 5 asks that he wanted for Ontario. I think the nuclear plant was the main one that actually is going ahead. Interestingly, Ring of Fire was not on this one either. But yeah, like the tunnel is very dumb, and it's a waste of money even doing the $9 million feasibility study they just commissioned on that. But yeah, Toronto should probably get a lot of infrastructure spending if we are doing something that is for the good of the country overall. And same thing with Southwest BC.
Do that. Do high-speed rail Calgary to Edmonton. Do like any of those intercity connections are going to be high payoff that just need a champion and have all kind of struggled around the study after study. So maybe eventually the spring's infrastructure excitement will turn into something more than another mining project. But in the meantime, I guess we will continue to expand our it is valuable, the mines. I don't want to, demean them or pretend they're not important, but I think you highlight the important point that it's just like a lot of these kind of resource projects don't actually benefit local communities as much as we like to pretend they do. They often involve a lot of the profits going to very few companies. Workers don't tend to have the best conditions. It's a lot better than it was 100 years ago, but that's not saying much.
And these days,
and it takes fewer people.
It takes fewer people, but the resource work is pretty well paid these days, too.
Yeah. So it's, I guess we'll see what else comes from David Eby, from Mark Carney, and, he said he's putting a lot of money into infrastructure in the budget. We didn't quite see it, but maybe the plan is yet to fully unveil. Let's talk about another part of the budget, though, was this goal of expanding the military. And we got a couple a story from David Pugliese out of the Ottawa Citizen, one of my favorite defense reporters, because he always seems to get the most interesting stories. And there's only like 3 defense reporters in this country, realistically. And there had been some talk about the armed forces expanding the reserves from, I think it's like 20 or 30,000 to 300,000 or 400,000 in the next couple of years. And we got a glimpse at an idea to do that. And it was let the public service voluntarily sign up for a tertiary reserve force, and they could get a 1 week a year learn to shoot a gun training. And then if we go to war, we can call the bureaucrats to the front lines, I guess.
It was a novel idea. I'll give them that.
I think that's how everyone responded to it. It's like, what? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you don't often see like a lot of creativity coming out of NDHQ, so I'll give them some props on that one. And we could probably use a little more outside the box thinking. That said, we could also use a lot more of just following the standard on how boxes should be done, because it's a pretty well-worn system at this point on what works. But yeah, like generally militaries, you have your primary forces, or that's your, full-time professional military. You have a primary reserve force, and then there's often the secondary reserve. That's, not the reserve forces that do 1 night a week of training and 1 weekend a month on training, but are less active but can be drawn upon in the event of emergency. Countries that have used mass conscription models where everyone does a couple of years when they turn 18, and then there's this huge reserve pool that can get called up because they have been trained, but they're not actively on the right primary reserve on that in the case of war. It's a model that works. Finland's done it quite successfully. Germany had that for a while during the Cold War. It's a workable model, and one that Canada could definitely consider if it needs a plan for how do you scale up from a force of 60,000 to several 100,000 in the event of a major conflict, which is something we ought to at least have a plan for that can be executed easily. That said, just packing that secondary reserve force out with a bunch of civil servants doesn't seem like the most obvious best way to do it.
The best parts of this plan involve waiving the age and fitness requirements for the reserves. So it's literally just, if you're at the public service, you want a week a year of shooting guns and flying drones, sign up for the army in your spare time. It's yeah. Like, even logistically, like you mentioned of boxes, I can't imagine they have the capacity to intake that many that quickly. I don't know what interest there would be among the public service, because it's described as voluntary to begin. But I mean, you could weirdly change. Well, you'd have to fight the union if you change their job to involve military conscription as part of being a civil servant. You'd also lose a bunch of Quebecois applicants, I imagine, because they don't like the C word very much for reasons of history. And having a bilingual civil service is a pretty high priority in this country most of the time. So there's so many questions I have about this idea, just like our top soldier.
Yeah, so after this came out on Tuesday and left a lot of people scratching their heads, earlier today, the Ottawa Citizen reports that the Chief Defence Staff is having some second thoughts and throwing some cold water on this idea.
Yeah. General Jenny Carnigan, her name appears on the document creating this, along with Deputy Defense Minister Stephanie Beck. This was all planned in May as like an investigation. Like, let's think about this. The stories all came out, and now she says it's not focused directly to public servants. Our public servants are already contributing extensively to the work we are doing in defense. She didn't really comment on why it should initially prioritize volunteer public servants. It's more just like words that she wrote that she doesn't stand behind anymore. And Pugliese photocopies the bits of the document into his article, because that's the kind of journalist he is. That's why I love his stuff.
I like the quote in this one that it's a classic. It's another classic case of study of failure by defense leaders to anticipate public interest in their activities and planning. I mean, in the defense of the defense leaders on this one, it takes a lot for Canadians to get a large degree of public interest in these matters, so I can kind of understand a bit why they were caught a little flat-footed on this one. That said, this is like outside the box enough that they probably should have seen it having a bit of a reaction.
Yeah. So,
yeah, it's wild. I'm pretty supportive of the idea of significantly expanding the reserve force in addition to expanding the regular force too. But you have a lot of problems right now of just the leaky pipeline trying to get people into the primary reserves, where it's hard to navigate the process. There's long delays. I've heard of people just having trouble like connecting with the people they need to connect with to actually go through the process and start it at the various reserve units. There's a bunch of low-hanging fruit on this one that the Canadian Forces should probably be looking at before they figure out kind of a weird plunge to get a bunch of civil servants into the ranks.
It also raises the logistic question of, imagine this plan was super successful and we had a really high voluntary rate from public service into the reserves, where we do go to war. We need to call a lot of these people up, and suddenly like the government can't function because people aren't at their jobs. And like, obviously government programming shifts in wartime, but you do need people there to like make the thing function so that we can deliver like the support we need for the war effort.
Yeah, it's a pretty well-known problem in defense economics on how do you effectively mobilize a country's citizens into the military without also causing a bunch of pain across the society by taking a bunch of people out of their civic roles and putting them in uniform. It's a real challenge that defense planners and leaders have trouble with in wartime. And there's never like a great answer for it. It's just one of those constraints you buck up against whenever you're trying to do these sorts of things.
Speaking of constraints, the budget had set out this idea of 15% cuts to government departments over the next few years. Everything needs to start shrinking. Well, except National Defense, the RCMP, and Canadian Border Service Agency, they only need to have savings of 2%. But I guess National Defense actually gets a big boost to budget on the broader scheme. But I guess the internal machinations. The reality of being in government is it turns out there's a lot of competing pressures. And so the government has revised its targets for a number of different agencies, where many more agencies only have to reduce their spending by 2% now rather than the 15%. This includes Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, Indigenous Services Canada, and the Department for Women and Gender Equality, as well as the Tri-Research Councils. That's the NSERC, SHERC, and the Canadian Institute of Health Research, as well as CSIS and the Communication Security Establishment. So the number of departments being cut is shrinking as different pressures exert themselves on the government and go, actually, if you cut, Indigenous relations or Indigenous services, you're going to have a lot of angry chiefs and communities yelling at you as they can't afford the programs that they're relying on. And those are two of the few programs that the federal government is directly responsible for delivering versus like generally giving grants or funding the provinces to do.
Yeah, although the story did note that several of the departments that have the reduced cuts they need to make are ones that end up just doing a lot of pass-through funding on that, where they primarily administer grants and transfers.
The research councils mostly
you can't really cut
do grants, but it's also like if you want to stimulate the economy, capture American brain talent, and support our research institutions, cutting the tri-councils is bad. And I'm actually surprised CSIS and CSE weren't in the initial round of protected from the cuts.
Yeah, if anything, those ones ought to have been in the initial round of protection, and I actually don't remember seeing much in the budget on those, but really those ought to have greater funding anyway. I mean, one of the was it yesterday or today, the Brits said they were reducing their intelligence sharing with the US over what's been happening in the Caribbean. Canada's been a little less eager to join with the Brits on that one, and probably a significant part of the reason why is we never really invested all that much in developing our own intelligent collection capabilities, which means we are in fact pretty reliant on the US to do a lot of that frontline and direct collection of intelligence, which severely limits our freedom of action in cases such as that.
I'm not as supportive of these agencies for the numerous civil liberty infractions they have committed over the years. I'm just more surprised that they weren't protected given the Carney government's stance around these kind of issues. But on the broader story, I mean, I think this is one of those, it's easy to talk a big talk until you suddenly are the one making the decisions, and then you have to look at the hard realities and go, actually, it's kind of like when Ken Sim became mayor. Basically, anytime someone becomes mayor or premier, promising to stop the gravy train or cut the fat or, end the waste, and they get into government, they realize there actually isn't as much waste as they thought. In fact, there's often a lot of starved departments that aren't doing well because they don't have the resources they need. And so you look around and go, all right, fine, we won't cut the thing that doesn't have anything to cut, or where if we cut it, we will lose significant chunks of our voter base. And I don't know what it means for their plan to reach budget balance, but it's one of those governing is different than campaigning stories is all, really. And campaigning is in fact different than posting, I guess. In the final story, this week, finally, Eve Engler has officially applied to join the NDP leadership race. I was kind of thinking he wouldn't after all of this.
It was definitely looking like he was just going to drag it out and never actually apply, and then whine about how terrible the NDP was that they were never going to accept him anyway.
He still did the whining. He still did the whining.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of that. There still is. But he has actually, according to him, finally put his candidate package forward to the NDP. So yeah, we'll actually see if he gets the green light. Notably, he's still not registered with Elections Canada, which raises its own set of questions, particularly because he has almost certainly been, according to him, collecting donations and almost certainly will have incurred a bunch of election expenses, which is the sort of thing you're supposed to register with Elections Canada as soon as you start doing.
His official, I'm looking at his website from October 25th, he has our vetting strategy, which explains why they're delaying at that point their application. And they say their timeline is consistent with Elections Canada rules. You're only considered an official leadership candidate once the party approves you. Only at that point, he says, do you formally have to register with Elections Canada. So he's kind of going why would I register with them if I don't get to be a candidate? In the meantime, we'll follow the rules. And they've also created a alternative vetting form stunt that you can fill out with weird random questions like, are you a landlord? Do you own an SUV? And so forth.
And well, we'll see if he finally makes it through. I mean, at this point, there's a long history of very controversial stuff he has said. Even putting aside what has been the hot button issue of the last couple of years, there were just comments about the Rwandan genocide. There is even just stuff like not following the rules of the leadership race with respect to how donations are collected. Like, there's a whole bunch of potential red flags when it comes to...
I think the thing that annoys me the most in his latest post, or at least his post announcing he'd filed his paper, is he tries to draw comparisons of like his efforts with Zoram Amdami of, the newly elected mayor of New York. And everyone left of Carney is making those comparisons with their own campaign for their own political reasons. His annoys me because what I see as the positives of the Mamdani effort was that it was about bringing people together for positive ideas and getting them excited. He fought the Democratic Party establishment, but he didn't spend most of his time slandering them for the sake of it. He just oozed charisma, which I don't get the vibe from Engler. I don't get the vibe from most Canadian politicians for that matter, but that's its own challenge. But it feels good watching Zoran Mamdani talk because he's funny and charming and has a vision. I think Engler does have a vision and does talk about policy, but then he spends so much time in these press releases just attacking people and not attacking the billionaire class or something that can bring people to him. It's more like it's factionalism. It's divide the left and just...
Yeah, it's a very Polyev-esque in a lot of ways, except instead of videos, it's incredibly wordy blog posts. But yeah, it has that same kind of energy on it, but with more just attacking your own party on it. And honestly, if he hates the NDP so much, why does he want to run for them?
The NDP being at its weakest point ever, you could reasonably start a new party.
Yeah,
and
if there was
displace them in 2
I mean,
years.
there's really like no appetite among the general public for his kind of politics. That party would, get a couple percent and, be in the losers' corner with the also-rans of the People's Party. But
Or
yeah,
if he does have the momentum he talks about, maybe there is an appetite out there for it, but the grandstanding virtuousness of this, like, they won't accept me, and just continuing to double down on that, it's sad.
so off-putting.
Yeah, like, just start your own party then, like, or take over the Green Party. That would be easier. Or, like in the UK, there is an effort to start a new left party called Your Party. It's having issues, but like, Jeremy Corbyn and I forget the other woman are putting work into that to do something. The Green Party there has its own effort. Like, there are paths that don't involve a hostile takeover that looks belligerent and is just bizarre. But I am actually curious to see if they choose to reject him. I suspect they will. He'll stamp his feet and then disappear.
Yeah, I'm just not even
But
sure if he ever really wanted the job. The whole thing, in every single aspect of how he has conducted himself and presented himself, really gives the impression that he is less interested in leading the NDP than he is in getting cancelled by the NDP and doing a whole, these guys are the worst for not letting me in and rejected me.
And I think that speaks to that's related to one of the things I've been thinking about this last week. I heard it on a podcast, is this discussion about like the federal NDP really lacks political talent, staffer talent, and has for a while. And part of that is they have government in 2 provinces. And so the people who can do talented policy analysis, social media campaigns, fundraising strategy, are working for David Eby. Well, they were working for John Horgan and David Eby or Wab Kinew. And there aren't that many in the NDP. The Liberals and Conservatives have more, but most of the Conservatives are working for Doug Ford or Daniel Smith or Scott Moe right now. And that's why the Liberals are in power federally to some extent, is whoever's in power in Ottawa is the opposite of who is in power in Toronto. It's weirdly consistent. And for the NDP, there's not much coordination strength there. So if whoever takes over better have a team of talented political operatives. That's one thing Mamdani seems to have had and is moving in with to the mayorship with, is a talented team of organizers, and we'll see how well they do on the policy side and implementation. But like, if you become the new leader of the NDP, who is the team that is going to help you transform the vision you ran on into an effective party, both in parliament and in a campaign? And I don't get the sense Engler has that at all. I don't get the sense most of them have that. Avi Lewis might. I don't know if Rob Ashton even does. Heather McPherson probably does, but it should be relying a lot on the status quo, which is its own issue. It's just bleak times for the NDP federally, but that's not news.
The main thing I'll quibble with on that, even though I mostly agree, is I actually don't think the policy is the thing that's holding them back. I mean, they haven't had like great like knock it out of the park idea or anything in a decade or two, but I think it's more just they've not done the sort of work that of doing good communications that connect well with people and really bring, and that I think is, if anything, where they need to focus more is on the like political operations side than coming out with a better policy PDFs that no one outside of a few reporters and a dozen or so people in Ottawa will ever read.
And us. But
yes,
no, I don't disagree. What I was trying to say with policy is like the people who take those ideas and make them work if you're in government, or sell if you're in a campaign or opposition, or are able to like analyze the government. Yeah. So
right. They need to get better at selling. Because if you want stuff to talk, you could probably just take a bunch of stuff from like the Center for Policy Alternatives and, slap a fresh coat of paint on it and call that your platform in some ways. But it's the actual like hard work of selling that I think is going to be more important than program design.
And so we'll see if the green light goes ahead for Engler. In the meantime, I know many of the other candidates, particularly Tony McQuail and Tenniel Johnston, are scrambling for signatures and dollars to keep themselves in the race. By the way, Farmer Tony McQuail has some of the best aesthetics on his social media. Check him out. It's quaint, retro, but like really well done. So big shout out to him. You don't have to care about his policy, but I enjoy his campaign. His campaign is like the opposite of Engler's, and it makes me happy. Even if they like probably don't disagree a lot on policy. It's just like the good vibes versus the like sour grapes campaign. And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.